Hello, everyone. For those of you who are just joining, we are going to begin the webinar shortly. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes to allow more people to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, it looks like the attendance is stabilizing a bit, so I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is the overview of the August 2023 VCS program updates for project developers. So my name is Nicole Shermer. I am the manager of VCS program development, and I'll be joined today by my colleagues who will each introduce themselves as they begin to speak. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to access the recording after the webinar online on the viewer website. And I believe if you have pre-registered for this webinar, you should also receive a link to the recording in your email inbox. Okay. So the objectives of today's webinar, number one is to provide an overview of the August 2023 VCS program updates for project developers. And number two is to answer questions from the audience about these program updates. On the screen now, you'll see the agenda. After some brief introductory slides, we will have an overview of the updates, which we have curated specifically for this audience. We imagine this will take around 60 minutes with 30 minutes of time for questions at the end. The updates, the overview of the updates will be organized around the effective date of the updates. So first, we will cover updates that are effective immediately. Then we'll cover updates which are effective on the 1st of January 2024, and finally updates which are effective on the 1st of March 2024. These are not all of the VCS program updates, but the ones that we have selected to present today. A note about questions during this webinar. You may submit questions in the Q&A box, which you should find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have enabled an upvoting feature for this webinar, so you should be able to see questions that other participants have submitted and upvote the ones which you think are most relevant and you would like to have answered. Please note that because your submissions are public, to please be respectful and appropriate, of course. And please keep this to questions which are relevant to the webinar. Any other questions can be submitted to our email addresses, which you will show at the end of the webinar, or any questions that are more specific. We will not be answering any questions that are not relevant to the webinar. Okay. So now a couple of introductory slides before I pass it along to my colleagues to give an overview of the program updates. Some key documents to have on hand: the summary of effective dates document, the link to which you see here on the screen, and all of the updated VCS program documents which were released in this program update on the 29th of August. Some key documents, of course, include the VCS standard, the VCS program definitions, the registration and issuance process, among others. There were also updated VCS project templates, which are cross-cutting and good documents to have as a reference on hand. Another thing to note about the effective dates document, it should be fairly straightforward and easy to navigate. You have here a unique update ID number, which helps with following along for which updates appear throughout the documents. You have the affected documents and section numbers here in this column of the effective dates document. And of course, you have the effective date itself. So this document could be helpful to have as a reference as we are going through these slides, as we will refer to the ID number of each update as we are talking about it. Finally, another note about effective dates to help with some interpretation, as these are common to all of updates. Effective immediately means that the update applies to all project requests submitted on or after the release date of the updates, which is the 29th of August, 2023. We have had a lot of questions about what all project requests means. So here it is clarified. Project requests refers to any project requests submitted to the Vera registry, such as pipeline listing requests, project registration requests, or verification approval requests. As noted at the top of the effective dates document, for updates that are not effective immediately, project proponents may conform with updated requirements before the effective date if they choose to do so. And if they do choose to do that, the validation verification body is also expected to validate or verify the project in accordance with those updated requirements. Please note that an updated effective dates document, as well as associated corrections and clarifications, will be published very shortly with some minor clarifications about which updates are effective to existing projects and other minor clarifications. So please be on the lookout for that very soon. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Anna to go over some of the following updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. So first we want to talk about the buffer release requirements and process. So previously, there wasn't a ton of clarification in the RIP about when a buffer release request could be made. So we have updated these requirements to include a requirement for when a project can request a buffer release. The buffer release must be requested after a verification request is approved, but within 3 months of approval. So we've also updated the language to clarify that the buffer credits are not VCUs and therefore cannot be traded. We've also updated loss event reporting information. So loss event reports requirements must be verified by a VVB, and the verification must be completed part of the subsequent verification. They must be submitted to registry@vera.org. We've also clarified what the loss event actually means. So we've updated the definition to clarify the language here. The threshold for reporting a loss event is now a cumulative loss of more than 5% of previously verified ERRs. We've also clarified what documents we would consider needing to be publicly posted. We've clarified this in the RIP, and it's clarified for each project request. So this states at registration, listing, verification, approval, crediting period renewal, we request certain documents, and those will be required to be public. We also wanted to clarify that public comments will be posted as a summary, and they will be any that are received during the public comment period. We've also updated information on commercially sensitive information, and this is tied directly to the previous slide about publicly posted documents. So we've updated the requirements on commercially sensitive information and clarified what can and cannot be considered commercially sensitive. VVBs must assess whether commercially sensitive information meets the rules and requirements in the VCS standard and the definition of sensitive information in the dedicated sections of the templates. If the information meets the definition, project proponents must upload a copy of a public and private copy of documents. But we've separated section 3.5.4 of the standard to include the list of information that is not to be considered commercially sensitive. For example, the determination of baseline scenario and the calculation of the non-permanence risk score. And we've also included instructions on sensitive information regarding the reporting in the VCS project templates. I'm going to pass this over to Justin to take us forward.
Hi, everyone. Justin Wheeler, Senior Director, VCS Program Development. So we've just updated some of the requirements for locations information for projects. So you must state the country, region, or local municipality, depending on the definitions in the jurisdiction that the project is being developed in. This is particularly important for the regulatory surplus additionality test. And we're also asking for geodetic polygons in a KML file that encompass all instances for grouped projects and delineate the smallest administrative division of land for the local government. So there's an example that's on the screen there that's also in the standard for what's expected of this.
Thank you, Justin. And I'm going to give a quick overview of this next update ID number 17. So this is a new requirement which clarifies when project proponents should use the most recent version of a data source. This is in section 3.15.5 of the VCS standard. Essentially, it clarifies that at verification, the project proponent shall use the most recent version of a data source that's available for any of the data or parameters that are monitored. So it's now both at validation and verification where data and parameters that are monitored should be using the most recent version of a data source that is publicly available. Think this back to Anna.
So we have received several single program requests using joint program templates. So we've updated the RIP to clarify when a project can submit a joint program template. And that is only when a concurrent request is being made. So if a project is requesting joint CCB and VCS registration, they can use a joint template. However, if the project requested let's say, comment period under both programs, but then is only moving forward with registration requests for VCS, only VCS templates may be used in this case. We have also made several updates to the project request section of the registration issuance process. We've streamlined the majority of the section. But what we have done is, so we've removed the idea of a completeness and accuracy review to include just project reviews. That we've also included what is called a project request denial process. We've clarified when we will begin project reviews, so all documents must be submitted in order for VERA to process a review. And VERA may deny the request at any point during the project review process. The registry statuses to reflect these processes will be available soon. And this is in section 4.3 of the registration and issuance process. On the slide, you'll see a few reasons as why VERA may deny a request. So for example, if the documents are deemed incomplete or of unsatisfactory quality, or where immediate nonconformances with the VCS program rules are identified. That's just one example of when VERA may deny a request. Next slide, please, Nicole. We've also clarified when a new request may be submitted as part of this denial. So new requests may only be submitted after 90 days from the date of denial. Registration requests that are denied must be submitted within 1 year of denial. And if a registration request is denied twice, the project itself will be rejected. For a project crediting period renewal request, same idea, must be submitted within 1 year of denial. And then if 2 denials occur, the project will be inactive and no longer can renew the crediting period. Again, the registry status is to reflect these processes will be available soon. And there's no special conditions on verification requests. Turn it back over to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Anna. Okay. I have this update, which is about the communications agreement, update number 46. So we have essentially just revised this section of the registration and issuance process. I believe it is section 7, to add clarity and make it a little bit more understandable in relation to expectations for submitting communications agreements and designating an authorized representative for the project. So as these sections are highlighted here, as you can see, where there are multiple project proponents, all the project proponents shall execute a communications agreement, one communications agreement, which shall be provided to the Vera registry. And this authorized representative may be a third party, or they may be appointed from among those project proponents. There's also a clause here that has been added to clarify the termination process. So in order to terminate an authorized representative, the project proponent where there is one or all of the project proponents where there are multiple shall provide a signed written notification of the termination to Vera, after which 712 and 713 apply to designate a new communications agreement and assign a new authorized representative. And then finally, 715 makes it clear that the project shall only have one authorized representative at any given time appointed by the communications agreement. So now I'm going to pass it along to my colleagues, Candace and Mohan, who will spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of key updates effective on the 1st of January, 2024.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Candace Finkham, the Senior Director of Nature-Based Innovation at Vera. And the first update I wanted to speak to is the updated version of the AFLU non-permanence risk tool. So we made a number of changes to the tool, and then also introduced an online tool. So some of the key changes that were made is that the new tool incorporates future climate change impacts and sea level rise. The minimum withholding has been increased from 10 to 12%. There's also additional withholdings for past government intervention and failure to submit a loss report. And the project longevity has been extended to 40 years, and this was an ICVCM requirement. And then we've also removed one stakeholder engagement mitigation measure because it's now a requirement within the VCS standard. Also not listed here is that there's no longer any negative scores in any of the sections of the tool, and as of the new year, all projects will be required to use the new AFLU non-permanence risk assessment calculator to generate the non-permanence risk report. So that will be an automated process using the online tool, and projects will need to upload supporting evidence to support their selections using the tool. Next slide, please. And then related to the project longevity and monitoring requirements, so as I mentioned in the past slide, we made some changes. We increased the project longevity to a minimum of 40 years in response to ICVCM requirements to meet the CCPs. Basically, moving forward, projects must follow the monitoring and compensation requirements when an instance leaves the project before the end of the project longevity. Vera also may monitor a project or class of project types where the crediting period is less than 40 years. So we're working on developing our our long-term remote monitoring system, and through that system, we're hoping to be able to monitor projects for 40 years in their post-crediting period, but it is going to take us some time to get that system up and operating. So on a case-by-case basis, we are willing to sort of monitor in the post-crediting period if project crediting period is shorter than the project longevity. So crediting periods and contracts can still be 20 or 30 years. It's only the longevity period and monitoring and compensation commitment that has to be 40 years. And as I mentioned previously, this will be required for CCP labels. And we've had to make a correction to the effective date for this update, and that's going to be published shortly. And I think it's over to Mohan here to do a demo. Is that right, Nicole?
Yes, we have invited our colleague Mohan from our tech innovations team to give us a quick sneak peek about what the digital tool is going to look like when it is released. So Mohan, if you're available to do that quick 5-minute sneak peek of what the digital tool looks like, that would be great.
Thank you, Nicole. Do I have a right to share my screen?
Are you able to do that?
No, it says you can't start sharing because other participant is sharing. So maybe you have to stop, pause.
Let me stop share.
Okay, let me try once again.
Thank you everyone for bearing with us.
Share. Okay, so thank you, Nicole, once again. Hello, everyone. You can share my screen, right? Just wanted to confirm.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you, Mohan.
Okay, good. All right, so we have this Affluent Non-Permanent Risk tool available from the Project Hub, and the users can log in to our Project Hub with the provided email ID and password. So you can sign in. Once you sign in, you will see the Project Hub screen. If you have any questions, you can ask in the Hub support email. And the Affluent Non-Permanent Risk tool is right here on the top right corner. We can click on this tool, and we have a walkthrough for a new user. So if you click on walkthrough, it will just give you in the 9 steps on what to do. So you can start a new assessment. You click on next, then there's an pop-up window where you need to provide all the details. You have the preview report, download report at the top. There's a help button also there at the top. We have these 2 guidance document and the tool document you can download as a PDF. Also, the Excel version of the tool is right here. You can download it from there too. And the only thing users need to do is to select those applicable check boxes or the radio buttons and provide some reasons for why they made that particular selection. They can also upload a file. And there are 3 different tabs of the forms that user need to fill in for the internal risk, external risk, and the natural risk. And once that is done, it will give us the quantity of credits to be deposited in the buffer pool account. I'll just give you a quick demo. So when we click on the new assessment, we can create a new risk assessment for the project that is already listed in our registry. So user will be able to see only the project that they are associated with. But here, because I am logged in as an admin, I'll be able to see all the projects. If the user is creating a risk assessment for a new project that is not listed in the registry, then they can just leave this blank and then create a new project name. I can just say test project for demo. Then I select the country, Argentina maybe. The net carbon stock is 555. Select the monitoring period start and end date, and then put some contact address. Then once I click on save, it will create a new record. And I have all these internal, external, and natural risk. They are in different tabs, and each tab has got subtabs, and user is supposed to select all those applicable risk for their particular project. Now what we have is we have a small explanation for each subtab. So if it is project management, then what that project management risk, it explains a little bit. And then you have a little eye icon here on the right. If you click on here, it will give you a little bit of details on what that project management risk is all about. And if you want to see more, then it will take you to the particular internal risk, project management risks section of that tool document and the guidance document. So everything is here within the tool for the users. And user can select. Now, if I say that A is applicable to my project, then I can say, I'll just go here. If it is yes, then I proceed to Q2. If I select yes, then do I have a project adaptive management plan in place or monitoring plan in place? Then I should say yes, and I provide a reason. Yes, it is in place. And if I want to upload that document, I can just upload the document using this upload feature. And I can just upload any document, for example. So just for the test purpose. And once that is done, it will turn into blue. Then I go on question 2. I do the same thing, provide a reason, REA-SON, and then click on save. And once I click on save, it will let me go to the next tab and go to the next tab. And I can complete. Now, so this one, you can collapse it so that you have got a little bit more room at the bottom. And you can preview the report by clicking on the preview report button. So whatever I have selected, I can preview it all at once. So it's a big scrollable document. And then if the document is complete, I can submit the report. I can download the report as a PDF. Since this report is not complete, when I download it, it will have a draft watermark on it. So we know that this report is not complete. It is still a draft form. And then once everything is done, I can submit the report from here. So as Candace mentioned, in the natural risk, we have added this future climate impact thing. Now, based on the country that we selected, this region is already populated. The applicable region is already populated. So you have a short list to select from here, unlike the Excel tool. And then once you select the particular reference region, you just need to select the project area, how much of the percentage is in that particular region. If we say 50, then we have to add another one. And then South America, say 50. So these things are already there. Makes it easy for the users to use the tool. And everything that is has a negative or positive impact, user just need to select. So if I say negative, I say for my particular region, for my particular project, if there is a mean air temperature increase, then it will have a negative impact to my project. And if that is the case, then I have to provide a reason why negative, and then I save it. And once I do everything, then I can go to the next one. So we have tried to make it as simple as possible and user-friendly as possible. You can always access the the help files or the additional guidance documents from here, review the report, and download the report. I'll just show you the one in which it is submitted. So this one has a submitted status. So one thing I want to share is that once the report is submitted, user can't edit. So here you can only copy, but this is a draft. You can edit the report. So submitted report, I can click on view and I can download the report. So when I download this report, now this report doesn't have the draft watermark in it, and then it has got all the contents and everything, and then everything is filled up properly. And it will also give us the final table with the total number of credits to be deposited in the buffer pool account. So this is the one that gets submitted to the registry eventually, and can be downloaded also for the user. This is all I wanted to show. What I also want to show, I mean, I think I got 1 more minute or something. So what I want to do is, if I go to this tool and try to submit this draft, what it does is it has got some validation checks. So first it will look at whether there is any project that is affluent project that is already there in Argentina. It takes a while to pull all this project list in our database. So just give me a second here. But I can save the project anytime, and then it will save it as a draft. Project management is saved successfully. Okay, one more thing I just show you before this thing is done. So on the external risk, we have this political risk. So this political risk we already populate. It's already pre-populated using the World Bank Institute, the World Governance Indicator. So user doesn't have to do anything right here. They just have to use whether this mitigation option is applicable to the project or not. So if the mitigation is applicable to the project, yes. If it is not, then you can just leave it blank. Otherwise, this score is automatically populated. We will just get that updated score from the WGI website. So based on the particular country that we selected. Now we are ready to submit the report. If we submit the report, it asks for the project ID. If we already have a project ID, then we can select the project ID and submit it. Let me select this project. This report is supposed to be for this project. Then I click on save. And what it does is it does the validation checks. Now, if user fails to enter the data for the required fields, then it will just show the list. So we have this tool make sure that whatever report is submitted completely. So it takes a little bit of time. Now it says that okay, so these are the things are incomplete. So please complete the following section and submit again. So user can go back to this section or to this section. Let's say I go to the stakeholder engagement. Now I have not answered anything. That's why it's telling me, not letting me to submit. So I have to answer the question and then submit it. That is all from my side. Okay, one more thing. So once that is submitted, let me just go back. So once this tool is submitted, user can't edit, I already told, but they can view. So whatever is done can be viewed, but it can be changed. So that makes sure that once the report is submitted, nobody can tamper it. It's all guided by the permissions. So user who are associated with the account or the project will only see their particular project on the list and their particular risk assessment that they have created. They can't modify other people's or other users' risk assessment. All right. So I stop sharing here.
Thank you so much, Mohan.
Thank you very much.
That was a great overview. And while I get the other slides back up, I'll just note that our team does plan to have another more in-depth webinar about the updated AFLU and PRT, hopefully sometime within the next month, and there will be an announcement about that. But please give me one moment while I share my screen again. Okay. I'm going to assume you can see my screen now, and we'll move along. So these are now the key updates that will be effective the 1st of March 2024, and I believe it is Anna.
Thanks, Nicole. So we have made some improvements to the VCS project templates. The intent was to streamline and clarify reporting requirements and include new program updates. So we've restructured and reformatted the template so reporting is more straightforward. There's less room for subjectivity, and the templates have been formatted to more directly link to standard requirements. Project proponents are welcome to use any of the new templates prior to the deadline. However, if you do so, VVBs will need to evaluate all information provided and will then also need to use the new templates. If validation or verification is anticipated to take closer to 6 months, we recommend that you update to the newest rules and templates as soon as possible to avoid any issues close to the deadline. We've made several revisions to the stakeholder engagement requirements. So first, we've actually split stakeholder engagement and safeguards into 2. We've included the following specific stakeholder groups: Indigenous peoples, local communities, and customary rights holders. We've also expanded stakeholder engagement so that FPIC is more specified, including FPIC, free prior informed consent, is ongoing as part of continued consultation. The new effective date for section 318.2 will be published soon as part of the new effective dates document that will be posted. The new effective date is any project that has a start date prior to October 1 will not be required to meet section 318.2. Any other project that has a start date of October 1 or after will be required to meet 318.2, meaning if your project has a start date of October 10th, 2023, project proponent will need to conduct stakeholder consultation prior to the implementation of those activities on October 10th, 2023. We've also clarified the new requirements for timing of stakeholder engagement, as well as what stakeholder represents under the VCS program. I will touch on this in another slide, but we've also included a formal procedure for comments received outside of the public comment period. As I mentioned previously, we have separated safeguards and stakeholder engagement into two sections. We have expanded no net harm. So most of what is new in this section, we wouldn't consider new information. Rather, it's specifications on what should be included in the assessment of no net harm. Where property rights have been affected, the project proponent must include a benefit sharing plan. This is a new requirement as it is linked to other requirements that we have included related to the strengthening of property rights requirements. The templates and requirements are structured now so that any risk-based requirement shall include an assessment of risk of that negative impact during the lifetime of the project or monitoring period, and the mitigation measures implemented to prevent the negative impacts must be reported on. There are some requirements where there can be no risk, and the project proponent will have to demonstrate that the project meets these requirements. As I mentioned, benefit sharing was not previously included, but now we have included a requirement on benefit sharing. We've included further specification on human rights as well, such as equity, including workers' rights, harm to women and girls, harm to minorities, and the rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, and customary rights holders. We have revised and included new requirements on what we are calling ecosystem health safeguards. The intent was to strengthen no negative impacts on ecosystems due to project activities, including the usage of invasive and non-native species and ecosystem conversion. We've strengthened the invasive species requirements and introduced reporting requirements for the usage of non-native species and justification for such use. Project proponents will need to justify that any non-native species is not invasive and will not have a negative impact on the project area. We've also specified the usage of non-native monocultures in ARR and WRC. This is not applicable to projects with the start date prior to 1 March 2024, pending further consultation. I'm going to let Justin speak to this a bit, but we have decided to reapproach this requirement. Justin, turn it over to you really quickly if you want to speak to this.
Sure, thanks, Anna. So we've received a number of comments related to the monoculture definition. We realized we need to probably clarify this requirement or definition a little bit more. So we released a clarification to the effective date. So the effective date is now March 21st for new projects. So if your project has already started by the time March 1st comes around, this requirement does not apply. That was published on our website on the 12th of September. Next steps are we will be doing a quick public consultation to just make sure that we're getting the full breadth of input on the requirement before we make any further revisions. You can expect that to come out in the coming week or two, with the intent of finalizing that hopefully by calendar year end to give, and then we'll adjust the effective date again if needed, but the intent would be to update this by year end. in consultation with stakeholders. And then the effective date, as I said, is 1st March. So the consultation will be published on our website. If you have immediate questions or things on that, feel free to email the program updates at vera.org, and we'll make sure you're on the list and have all the relevant information about that. Back to Anna, I guess.
Thanks, Justin. So one last piece of safeguard updates is that we have specified an already in place procedure, and that's to handle comments received outside of the public comment period. This is in alignment with both the CCB and SU Vista programs. So comments that are submitted to Vera outside of the comment period will be shared with the project proponents and VVBs. Project proponents shall evaluate and address any comments within 1 year of receipt. The addressment of these comments shall be assessed by a VVB at the next validation and verification, and the project proponent shall demonstrate that the input has been considered and appropriately addressed, including potentially response to stakeholder or improving implementation of project activities. I'm going to turn it back over to Justin now to wrap it up for us.
Okay, thanks. This is the last slide, and then we'll go to questions. Remember to review the questions that are in there and upvote so that we can address the most urgent ones. So the final update relates to double counting requirements and scope 3 related reporting requirements. So we clarified the requirements. These aren't new, but we clarified what we mean by double counting, especially double issuance and double claiming. So the basic rule is double registration is allowed in some circumstances. So a project could be registered in 2 different programs. So that's maybe like a national system and the Vera system, but double issuance is not allowed. And then in terms of evidence, so you're required to disclose if you are, sorry, I'll turn on my video here. You're required to disclose if you are double registered, if you're registered in any other program other than the VCS, and required to provide evidence that no double counting or double issuance has occurred. So the evidence requirements for that are laid out in, well, all of these requirements are in the standards, section 3.23 and 3.24. And the evidence is essentially either evidence from the program administrator, or if all of the information is public, then you can provide us you can point us to where the information is public to demonstrate that no double issuance has occurred, and you're expected to make a written commitment that no double issuance will be pursued in either program. There is a clarification that we will be publishing today on, it's been mentioned a couple times already, I think, but it will include a minor clarification to this to just specify that reference to public documents such as the registry are acceptable in place of a signed letter. So that's it for the update slides. We'll move to the Q&A section. As we mentioned, please review and upvote, and we'll just try to take them from top to bottom for the most part, unless there's repetition. So the first one relates to consultation. So the project proponent must consult with stakeholders before carrying out project activities in the updated requirements for stakeholder consultation. So the question is, in this sense, is it considered that the start of the date of the projects will only be possible after consultation? Does this imply any difficulty in requesting retroactive credits? Is it necessary to conduct the entire process listed in the standard 3.18.2? There's a list there of 1 to 7 with evidence of completion. Otherwise, what's the minimum interaction or documentation necessary to certify the project start date with the communities? So I'll turn it over to Anna to answer this, but again, I'll just say that we are publishing a clarification of the effective dates for this requirement. Hopefully that'll be up today. We're just working with our web team to get that all finalized and published.
Thanks, Justin. There are a number of questions related to this within the chat, so I'm just going to address this now, and then we can move on to other questions. Just I think it's good to get
Yep.
this answered at one time. So as you know, the requirement states it's prior to implementation. I think that the important piece of this requirement is that we feel, and why we have updated this, is that stakeholders need to be aware of any project activity that is going to be implemented. If a project activity includes interactions with a stakeholder, let's say a RED project that is working with the community to implement potential sustainable agricultural activities or forest patrols, that would be the start of project activities. So we would need to see consultation with those communities, and the FPIC process, which means consent to do these activities, consent to be consulted. We would need to see that the project had taken into account the communities that will be affected by these activities, even if these activities are being implemented with a community. The rest of the questions are great. I actually would recommend you submit this via email, and we can try to get this back to you, because as we know, there is a bit of nuance between different activity types, so a blanket answer might not work here. If having formal guidance on this particular requirement or any of the safeguard requirements would be useful to project proponents and other stakeholders, please let us know. That is something that we would be willing to consider to publish, just to make these requirements easier, as we know that they are more specific than previously. So I hope that answers the question. If not, maybe you can put another one in the chat, or please reach out to us at info@vera.org.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So we've said reach out by email a couple of times. You can use the info@vera.org for general inquiries. If you have questions specifically related to the program update, you can also use program updates at vera.org. That's the shared inbox for our team. There's one other thing I wanted to add. The clarification will be published today. So the stakeholder consultation is obviously going to vary by project. So one of the steps is identification of impacted stakeholders. It may be the case that for some types of projects, like if you're doing a methane destruction at a landfill and there's really no impacts, or potentially only some minor positive impacts beyond the borders of the landfill, the extent of your stakeholder consultation at that first stage may be identifying that there are no negatively impacted stakeholders, and then you proceed with the project activity. So it's going to vary quite a lot depending on the project type, but you are expected to do that at the front end. And then the other thing is, Anna mentioned that consultation is an ongoing process. So there is the ability for people to submit comments throughout the life of the project, and those will be forwarded to the project proponent to address. So it's not that you have to finish and nobody has any questions. It's just that you have to do the initial stakeholder consultation process and complete that before you move on with your project. Okay, the next question, and I think there were a few related to this, and I spoke to it briefly, but there's a question about monocultures. So the requirement for ARR and WRC, that's afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, and wetland restoration and conservation activities. The project shall not introduce non-native monocultures. The question is, do you have a definition of monocultures, or what's considered non-native, such as the percentage of species if a select species exists and some don't, or it's demonstrable that there's no negative impacts. So this is exactly what we want to cover in our further consultation. There is a definition in our program definitions of monoculture, but it's fairly brief. So we'll be reaching out for input on potentially nuance that needs to be added to the definition or to the requirements that are associated with monocultures. So stay tuned for that consultation. The next one, Candace, I think is for you. So there were a few questions related to the 40-year longevity requirement and the associated impacts on contracts and things like that. So maybe you just want to give a bit of an overarching answer that answers a few of these questions rather than me reading out a specific one.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to answer a few questions relate to the 40-year longevity requirement. So first of all, there's going to be a clarification, sorry, coming out later today, that it'll be effective January 1st to all new projects requesting registration after that date. So existing projects do not need to meet the 40-year longevity requirement. However, they will not be able to get the CCP label if they do not meet the 40-year longevity requirement. So that's the first part that I wanted to clarify, because I know there was a question related to that. And then also there's another question about, I think it applies to projects where you've got multiple landowners participating in a project, and contract durations with those individual landowners may be less than 40 years. So in that case, that's acceptable. Contracts with individual landowners in a group project can be less than 40 years, but you need to demonstrate the 40-year longevity at the group level. So in the non-permanence risk tool in the project longevity section, there is some guidance on what is needed to demonstrate longevity at the group level. For example, it requests that you provide a plan for how you would renew contracts with landowners, how you would sort of replace landowners that leave the project with other landowners over time. So there's more details in the non-permanence risk tool on how you can manage project longevity at the group level. I think that answers one of the questions. Let me just scroll down to see if there's any others, Justin. There's a question about the trade-offs or pros and cons of a project developer designing a project with a 20-year or 30-year accrediting period versus a 40-year accrediting period. And I think the reason why we decided not to increase the minimum crediting period to 40 years was because we knew that there were some project types for which it wasn't possible to credit for that long. And therefore we left the minimum crediting period at 20 years, but then you still have this 40-year monitoring and compensation liability for permanence. So I think that, the pros and cons, it really depends on the project type and whether or not you can credit that long and whether or not you want to commit to a 40-year crediting period up front. I think it really varies by project type. So maybe I'll stop there. I answered a couple of them. I think there's a few more, Justin, that maybe we'll get to as well.
Great. Thanks, Candace. So there's one more related to consultation. Anna, sorry if this is repetitive, but it's a good clarification on what this means for grouped projects. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So as part of ongoing consultation for a group project, if there are new instances that are going to impact new groups of stakeholders, you'd need to identify those new groups of stakeholders and then perform a consultation prior to implementing activities in that new area. The idea is, again, the same. If these stakeholders are going to be directly impacted by project activities, even if the overall the first instances have been validated with consultation taking prior to implementation, that is great for those instances, but we need to see that as ongoing, because if new groups of stakeholders are being included, they also need to be consulted with prior to implementing any activities that will impact them.
Great, thanks, Anna. So there's another one related to monocultures. This is what will happen to existing projects that maybe do use monocultures. So the requirement is effective for new projects. If you have a project that's already underway that includes some monoculture, that project can continue for the life of the crediting period. So that's, I guess, stepping back, that's the purpose of the effective dates document, is to clarify when each requirement takes effect. And in general, a lot of the requirements that would affect whether a project can be registered or is eligible are go forward type requirements. So be sure to review the effective dates, not just the requirements in the standard. And I guess maybe one other comment related to that. So in the bottom of each document, there's an appendix that has the document history and effective dates. So you can review the summary of effective dates, which Nicole pointed to at the start of the webinar, or within each document, go to the very end and see what the effective dates are for any updated requirements. Okay, the next question is, how does Vera expect project proponents to identify any potential negative impacts of project activities as part of the updated stakeholder requirements? Will Vera issue any tools or modules to allow for impacts to be assessed consistently over time and across all projects? So I'll turn it over to Anna to answer this, but maybe I'll just say it's within reason, right? Like, this is not somebody stepped on a bug walking to the project site or something like that. Like, this is looking for material potential negative impacts that can be abated as part of implementation of the project activity.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. As I mentioned during the presentation, we don't consider most of these safeguards to be new in that they would be part of no net harm. So our expectation is that the evaluation of risk would be similar to how risk was identified under no net harm. We've included further specific requirements that we would have expected to be evaluated under no net harm, such as worker safety. So the risk assessment that was conducted as part of the assessment of no net harm is what we expect to see. In the future, we may update these requirements to be project specific. Again, if having a tool or having that be possibility would be useful, please reach out to let us know. But as Justin says, we're not looking for incredibly minute details of any time anyone entered the project site, whether or not they touched a plant, so to speak. We're looking for more just general impacts of overall the risk to project activities. And again, we would consider this the same as part of the no net harm evaluation.
Thanks, Anna. And be sure to look at the project templates as you're reviewing those requirements, because there is a fair bit of specificity in the project templates that can hopefully serve as a little bit of a tool to guide you. But as Anna said, we're open to developing more guidance or tools if that's useful to people. So feel free to reach out if that would be useful. Okay, the next one is, I don't know all of these acronyms. Oh, I see. With the new requirement on local stakeholder consultation and FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, to be before the start date and the implementation of activities, does that basically mean that no retroactivity is possible for projects nowadays if they've not started with FPIC and local stakeholder consultation? Anna, this is you again.
Sure. So I can answer this one and the next one as well, just for consistency.
Great.
So for this question, so as part, just to clarify, if the project activities have started prior to 1 October, this requirement doesn't apply. So if the project activities were implemented on the private land prior to 1 October 2023, this requirement doesn't apply. However, moving forward, even if the activity isn't in a private area, the project would need to first identify any impacted stakeholders. So if the identification of impacted stakeholders is just the private landowner and there is no group of stakeholders outside that could possibly be affected by the project, because again, we've specified what we mean by stakeholders in the program, then FPIC, LSC, all of that would only need to take place with that private landowner, if that's the case. But for an ARR project such as this, again, if there are any affected community members, there would need to be this, or stakeholders, there would need to be a consultation prior to the start of planting. So related, the next question is, can we clarify what constitutes project activities in this context? So project activities, we would still consider the same as what is specified under the standard. So we haven't changed what we would consider a project activity. It's just rather that we're specifying that if consultation is part of project activities, so if again, I gave that example for RED project, we would still need to see that sensitization and FPIC took part prior to implementation. So any actual activities that took place. So we would consider this consultation as prior to potentially setting up forest patrols, starting education about sustainable agricultural land management activities. So the idea of project activities have not changed. It's that we need to see that consultation took place prior to implementation of any of the activities that we've specified in the standard as potential types of project activities.
And when you're looking at the definitions, the definition of crediting period start date is also relevant to these requirements, because that gives some of the specifics for OFOLO and non-OFOLO projects. Okay, the next one is for Candace, around the timeline for long-term monitoring. The increase in project longevity has contractual and legal effects for several projects. Clarity on what BERA requires for long-term monitoring is crucial to determining how to deal with these types of issues.
Thanks, Justin. I believe this question is asking about the timeline for BERA's long-term monitoring system, but I'm not entirely sure. So initially we had a 5-year development cycle that we were working on, but we are now trying to expedite the development of the long-term monitoring system so that we can take on monitoring more projects in the post-crediting period sooner. We are optimistic that in the near term we can do that for forest carbon project types, and that agriculture and blue carbon will follow after that. But for the time being, we can only say that on a case-by-case basis will we agree right now to monitor projects in their post-crediting period out to the 40-year longevity. And there will be a contract that will be formed in the coming weeks or months related to the compensation requirements for avoidable reversals.
Great, thanks, Candace. So please reach out to us if you are in the situation of starting a project and you have a less than 40-year crediting period and you want to discuss monitoring options, including potentially cooperating with VERA on that. So next question, will there be a guideline for proponents to justify the use of non-native species for developers to know what is rationally acceptable under the standard requirements? So I think this will relate to the consultation on monocultures as well, but Anna, would you like to say a couple more words about non-native species?
Sure. So there is specification in the templates on how justification should take place. We're really looking to make sure that project proponents are demonstrating that any species being used in the project is not invasive. So if the project is using a non-native species, we need to know why the project is using that species, and we need to know that it's not invasive and it's not going to negatively impact the project area.
Awesome, thank you. The next one, I think we sort of answered already, but it relates to effective dates to the NPRT. So yes, we are issuing a clarification. Again, hopefully that'll be up today, that all of the updates for the NPRT take effect January 1st, 2024. But also with the clarification that for the 40-year portion of those updates, that's for new projects only and does not apply retroactively to existing projects. But as Candace said, once VERA is approved under the ICVCM, if you're wanting to label your credits as CCP, core carbon principles, which will be the label for the Integrity Council for voluntary carbon markets, then you will have to update your project longevity period to be at least 40 years. The next question relates to the buffer. To update the minimum risk buffer, did you actually analyze the risk of all projects and the size of the risk buffer between this and the increase issuance pricing? This is impacting projects. So Candace, do you just want to say a few words about the background on the buffer? And NPRT, I guess, is what they're actually talking about.
Yeah, so we did look at the size of the buffer. Our average withholding before the updates were put in place was around 14.5%, I believe. And through some buffer analysis, we recognized that this value was too low, particularly with the growing impacts of climate change on projects, and hence the changes that we made to the non-permanence risk tool.
Thanks, Candace. And I guess maybe the other thing to point out that for those that aren't familiar is Verra does have a commitment to periodic stress testing of our buffer and making any updates that are required to ensure the viability of the buffer over the long term. So this is part of that. The next question relates to benefit sharing. So will benefit sharing plans as disclosed in the PDD be required to be verified, tracked by the verifiers on every verification? Sorry, that's a mouthful. Go ahead, Anna.
Yes, project proponents will be required to report on the continuation of any benefit sharing that's been validated in the project description, and an auditor will be required to verify all information provided in the monitoring report, including the tracking and reporting on of benefit sharing plans and ongoing benefit sharing.
My apologies. I haven't been watching the time very closely. I believe this webinar was originally scheduled for just an hour. The recording will be available, so if you do have to jump off, feel free. I think we'll answer a few more questions before closing, just because we're all here and available on the Verra side. But apologies if this is going into your next appointment on your calendar. So the next question is again related to monoculture, and it asks if monoculture is allowed for native species, because native species monocultures can still affect biodiversity. That's a great comment. That's the type of thing we want to look into in the consultation. So we look forward to talking more to people about that. The next question is again related to the NPRT. So non-permanence risk assessment has to happen at every verification. Will projects registered previously need to make any adjustments for how they've been monitoring to account for non-permanence? For example, if a project's risk rating is calculated to be 10, previously that was the minimum, and now they have the new minimum of 12, will the new minimum need to be applied instead? So Candace, I think maybe just speak to whether the updated minimums are retroactive or just for the new verification.
Yeah, so at the next verification, projects will be required to use the new non-permanence risk tool, which means that all the changes in the non-permanence risk tool will apply, except for the 40-year longevity requirement to existing projects. So if your previous risk score was 10, you will need to increase it to a minimum of 12 on a go-forward basis, and the other changes as well related to future climate change impacts would apply. For the purpose of buffer credit release calculations, what we will do is you will do a historical risk assessment using the new tool, and then compare that against your current risk assessment to determine whether or not you get a buffer credit release, because we know that everyone's scores will go up as a result of the changes, and hence you'll have to redo a historical assessment for the comparison to determine if you get a release.
Great, thanks, Candace. So the next question relates to benefit sharing again. Is the benefit sharing plan required to be public? Are there requirements on the actual structure or equity of the benefit sharing plan? Anna, if you could speak to that, maybe just to reiterate something that was said in the presentation, benefit sharing plans are not required for all projects. This just relates to the safeguards around property rights. But go ahead, Anna.
The benefit sharing plan is not expected to be public. However, one of the stipulations of the benefit sharing plan is that it must be agreed upon by Indigenous peoples, local communities, and legitimate customary rights holders. So if the parties that have signed this agreement want it to be public, it is agreed upon that it will be public, then it should be public. But there is no requirement that says this plan must be public. Within section 319/2022 of the standard, which outlines the benefit sharing plan requirements. Right now, we do include provisions. So on the structure or equity of this plan, we have in the standard that it must be appropriate to the local context. It must be consistent with any national rules and regulations, international human rights laws and standards, and consistent with customary rights to the maximum event feasible and shared in a culturally appropriate manner. If further clarification is required, or stakeholders feel like this is not enough information, again, please feel free to reach out to us via email. And if a tool or further guidance is requested, that we'd love to hear that. But I do also want to suggest that stakeholders look at either the CCB program or the SD Vista program for further information or guidance on potential benefit sharing, as they have more specific requirements related to community engagement, and therefore may have any tools or potential resources that a project could use to develop a benefit sharing plan.
Great, thanks, Anna. And I guess maybe just one more comment on that. It's not required to be public, but proponents may choose to make it public, and that may have benefits for you in terms of the buyers you can attract or price you can receive. So feel free, if you do prefer, to disclose additional information in your project documents. There's a question about what are we doing with CCB, so the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard. Are some of these updates duplicative with that? So yes, some of the enhanced disclosure requirements related to safeguards are a little bit duplicative, or in some cases maybe even going a bit further than the minimum requirements under CCB. So our colleagues in the SD team are looking at CCB now and potential updates to that program to bring those back into harmonization and alignment. So stay tuned for potential updates on the CCB side. Not imminently, that work is underway now, but any major changes will of course be consulted on prior to release. So stay tuned for that. Can there be more clarity on the use of naturalized species, those species that have existed in a country for several years and is currently beneficial to communities or even part of their lifestyle, though they may be non-native in the strictest sense of the word? Anna, can you speak to that and maybe speak to the types of resources that people can use for the definition of non-native?
Yeah, this is, I think, related to the next question as well. So I will answer both. The next question is, what criteria do we need to satisfy to prove non-invasiveness? So the standard actually sets out what registries should be used in order to prove non-invasiveness, and then also to provide information on the impact of these species within the project area. The order of priority would be local, regional, or a global invasive species registry. If those registries don't exist, we would like project proponents to use a locally applicable information source and provide that source used in the project documents. So for example, if there is a local community leader who can provide information on the impact that the species has had in the local area in terms of biodiversity impact, water quality, et cetera, all of these different impacts that species may have on stakeholder resources and the environment. And they can demonstrate that through their knowledge that this non-native species hasn't negatively impacted the biodiversity in the project area, we would find that appropriate. And again, we would say that if the local context can demonstrate that the species is not invasive, then that we would consider that appropriate as well. We wanted to provide a bit of flexibility here in terms of recognizing that it might be local knowledge that isn't necessarily published in a paper or isn't necessarily in a registry that the government or internationally is placed. So we want to be cognizant and respectful of local knowledge, and we would prefer that to be used. However, other registries may be used to prove this, and as long as we have evidence that registries or a local context has proven that these species aren't going to negatively impact the biodiversity, have more positive benefits than negative, and are not invasive, we would accept those justifications.
Great, thanks, Anna. There's a question on buffer release, and will buffer credits still be able to be released for individual projects? Yes, and we have actually clarified the procedure for buffer release in the updated version of the registration and issuance process. So feel free to have a look at that. There's a couple of questions here that are fairly specific, including one on the long-term average from Maria. So please feel free to reach out to us by email for that one in particular, but also for any more kind of specific detailed questions. I think we're running out of time, so I'll maybe just answer one more and then we'll close it for today. And we have a closing slide that shows our email addresses and things. So there's one about the data. So there's an updated requirement to use the most recent data. And this is a good question. What if project monitoring period is from a prior period and then new data comes out kind of post that period? So I think the example in the question is if somebody is doing a validation for a 2020 crediting period or 2021 crediting period, and new data related to an emission factor was released in 2023. It's entirely reasonable to use kind of the most current data that was available at the time of the monitoring period. So feel free to kind of provide that justification in your documentation. Of course, review that with your VVB, but we won't penalize you. You know, if something came out the day before you submitted it and you didn't use it because you'd already done all of your preparation of your monitoring report and verification using the data that was current at the time that was prepared or most relevant to the period that you're reporting from, that's entirely reasonable, and feel free to just explain that in your project documents. Okay. I think we'll close it there. Thank you very much for your attention and your time today. Thank you for all the questions, very good questions, and for the upvoting. That was very useful. Hopefully we were able to answer some of the highest priority questions. We do have a couple upcoming webinars, so I'll hand it over to Nicole to just close us out, speak to how you can get in touch with us with further questions and the next steps are.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you to all of our colleagues here today who gave an overview of the program updates. We hope this webinar was helpful for everyone. In particular, we hope that having a dedicated webinar specifically for project developers was helpful, in addition to having a more general overview of program updates, which we had earlier this month. As Justin mentioned, there are 2 more upcoming webinars about this round of program updates. There's one tomorrow, I believe, on the new VCU labels, which have been made available, including Article 6 and removals and reductions labels. And then I believe on Thursday, there is a webinar, which is an overview specifically for validation and verification bodies. So you'll be able to find the links to register for those webinars if you're interested on the Vera website. So thank you for everyone who submitted questions. If you have any follow-up questions or questions that we were not able to answer today, do feel free to direct them to these 2 email addresses on the screen. For updates or for questions that are specific to these new program updates, we recommend using programupdates@vera.org. And then for questions that are more general or for questions that are more specific to your project, we recommend reaching out to info@vera.org. So thank you again, everybody. We hope that you have found this webinar helpful, and we also hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much.